All right, it's 5 o'clock now, so we can get started. Just to let everybody know, we are recording this webinar and we are going to be live streaming it on Facebook at the same time. I need to just back out of my slide here for a moment so I can share this on Facebook and we will get started. All righty. Well, my name is Tracy Lowe. I'm the editor of American Archaeology, and I'll be your host this evening. We also have with us Sarah Weber, who is our special projects director here in our headquarters in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we've got Kelly Berliner, who is our Eastern Regional Director. And she'll speak with us a few minutes before Dr. Leslie to give us a little bit of background on the site and the Conservancy's involvement. And so that'll give us a little bit of context for this evening. Just quickly, housekeeping wise, we will be doing the Q&A at the very end of the presentation. So use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen to input your questions at any time. And we'll keep track of those throughout the presentation, and then we can curate them for Dr. Leslie and Kelly at the end of the presentation. If you have any kind of technical difficulties or get booted off, you can hop over and see us on Facebook with this presentation being live streamed. And if you miss it entirely, we will be recording this and posting it on our YouTube channel by tomorrow. Are you still seeing my slides, or is it just us now? Okay, great. Okay, so tonight's lecture is about Fort Decatur. Kelly, tell me if I'm saying that, if I'm botching the name, but I think that's how you say it.
You're good.
All right. This is a War of 1812 era naval site, and we're going to talk about what archaeology and geophysics can reveal about how the fort was laid out and used, coming out of a collaborative project in the 2023 and 2024 field seasons. And I'll let Dr. Leslie talk a little bit more about that and explain the ins and outs. Dr. David Leslie was part of the project team during those field seasons and helped lead the geophysical side of the work. It's a pleasure to welcome you here tonight, Dr. Leslie. Thank you for joining us. Dr. David Leslie is the Director of Research at Heritage Consultants, LLC, Principal at TerraSearch Geophysical, LLC, and a research scientist with the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of Connecticut. Say that 5 times fast. Kelly, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you if you want to talk a little bit about the site and our involvement.
Sure, you guys can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So I won't go too much into detail at all about the site. I'm going to let Dave really take the charge on that, given all the work that he's done out there. But what makes Fort Decatur so exciting, aside from its own historical merits, is that it is set to become an archaeological conservancy preserve, and it'll be our third preserve in Connecticut. So we're quite excited about that. And briefly, I just wanted to share this project is a really wonderful example of how the Archaeological Conservancy works with cultural resource management firms as well as state historic preservation offices to preserve sites across the country. So briefly, this property is owned by Gales Ferry Intermodal Incorporated. They purchased this land in order to develop it for industrial purposes. Excuse me. And often this type of development will trigger review through Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, though in this case, prior to any development taking place, prior to permitting, the developers being aware of Fort Decatur on the property and its importance, went ahead and hired heritage consultants to undertake preliminary testing to define the site and see what was out there. So we'll hear more about that testing tonight. But what happened was archaeologists with heritage consultants made the Conservancy aware that this might be a good candidate for preservation, especially given the site's importance and the likelihood that it would be part of any mitigation, that would take place following any review. So with review, the Connecticut State Historic Preservation Office took an interest, again, even though this was prior to permitting processes. And so with all these parties at the table, we were able to enter negotiations on what it would look like to try and protect the core of this site so development could proceed on the remainder of the property. And so this is something we do very frequently. We partner with developers all across the country, trying to save as much of these sites as we can while allowing them to move forward with development on the remaining areas of their properties. And of course, helping to facilitate that are these cultural resource management firms who are undertaking testing on the property and defining site boundaries and what's important that's out there. And so after our negotiations with the property owner, it was determined that the Conservancy would acquire at least 3.44 acres of property containing the heart of the fort site, as well as some additional acreage, possibly depending on the direction that development goes in the future here. So we're really, really excited about this acquisition, and we're so grateful for Heritage Consultants bringing us in and working with us on this. And thank you so much, Dave, for coming to talk about it. I'm really excited to hear all about it again. So I'll hand it off to you.
Sure. Thanks, Kelly, for that introduction to how we got here. I'll be backtracking a little bit as I go through my presentation. I'm just going to make sure that I can share my screen, though. So everyone bear with me. This is my 4th Zoom meeting of today, so I should be pretty good at it by now. But let's see if I can get into full screen mode, too. Okay, can everyone see? I guess nobody else can talk right now, but hopefully everyone can see.
You're good.
Okay, great. So thanks again for having me here. This is one of my favorite archaeological sites that we've had the pleasure to work on over the last 3 or 4 years at Heritage. We've had some good ones, but this is one, as Kelly mentioned, that I think has one of the best outcomes too. And so I'm really excited to share what we've learned over the last couple of years about this site, why it's so important, and why we're so excited about the Conservancy now taking control of it too. So we'll just back up a little bit for those who are not scholars of either Stephen Decatur, who the fort is named for, or the War of 1812, and we'll do a little bit of history of both of those subjects for everyone. As Kelly mentioned, it's one of the Conservancy's newest properties. It's going to become preserved. It was gifted to the Conservancy by Gales Ferry Intermodal and Jay Cashman, the CEO of Gales Ferry Intermodal. But it is a War of 1812 fortification that sits above the Thames River in southeastern Connecticut. If you were to Google Fort Decatur, you might come up with other Fort Decaturs, because Stephen Decatur, as many of you may or may not know, was a important person in the early 19th century. There are 3 forts that are named for him. At this point in the War of 1812, he was Commodore Decatur. There's a fort in what would become Alabama down here, if you can see my cursor. There was another fort here in New York City. And then the one that I'm going to talk about, which is, as far as I know, is the one that he had the most involvement with. I don't believe he was ever at the one in Alabama. I could be wrong. But in any case, he spent a considerable amount of time here. And there are many places in the country that are named Decatur because, as I said, in the 19th century, he was quite a famous person who, unfortunately, some short years after the War of 1812, passed away in a duel, actually, so which is why many people might not know him today. The work we conducted was between 2022 and 2024, and we'll discuss, as I said, a little bit about Decatur to give you some back history on him, the history of the fort itself when it was occupied, and then the archaeology we conducted. And Kelly has sort of already mentioned the exciting outcomes, but we'll touch on those at the end. So just briefly, as I go through Stephen Decatur's early life, he was born in the end of the 18th century, graduated from the University of Penn in 1795, but instead of taking a trade or other work, he joined as a midshipman the burgeoning Navy, 1798, and was a comer. He rapidly rose through the ranks. There were several small engagements that occur in that period between the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. Sorry if I just go back. He was rose to the rank of lieutenant by 1799, so within a year, with this quasi-war between France and some of their possessions or colonies in the West Indies. He continues to rise and distinguish himself in the brief war with the Barbary states in what is today North Africa in the early 19th century. He's the first lieutenant on the USS Essex, and he's in command of a 12-gun schooner, the Enterprise, in 1803. He really distinguishes himself in the second attack on Tripoli. There are a number of things that occur here, but he leads the raid on the USS Philadelphia, which was, of course, a United States ship, but it was being lost to the enemy, and so they burned it so that it wouldn't be taken possession of. And so that's when he really becomes sort of a household name in the early 19th century. And it's for those actions that he receives a captain's commission, which made him then and today still the youngest person to ever hold that rank in the U.S. Navy. And so I go over this to describe sort of who he was, but he was the person who, as the War of 1812 is starting to break out, as I mentioned, was quite famous for his heroic actions. And so someone who was looking, as the war broke out, to continue to make a name for himself. So we move forward now to the War of 1812, which I'm sure many people on this call are somewhat familiar with, but it's not a war that I think is discussed or taught as much as the ones that are in between it or bookending it, right? The War for Independence, and then moving forward, the Civil War are getting much more time. It's not moving forward. Sorry. In any case, tensions had been mounting in the early 19th century between the United States and Great Britain. Largely, the War for Independence, while it had been decided, there was this unease between the United Kingdom and the United States, right? They still have many interests in North America, in the northern Canada colonies, as well as areas to the west of the United States. The U.S. remains neutral during the Napoleonic Wars between France and the United Kingdom. But because of this neutrality, the British begin to seize neutral ships. They have this practice called impressment of sailors. It's estimated between 6,000 and 9,000 United States sailors, and part of our merchant marine, so commerce ships too, not just vessels of war, are being taken and pressed into service in the British Navy. This understandably outrages many Americans and leads to the declaration of war on the United Kingdom in 1812. And so without going much more into the War of 1812, we'll just talk about Decatur and what he was doing during the war. He had risen by now to the rank of Commodore, and he provides one of the sort of bright spots in the U.S. Navy's theater of the War of 1812. He captures the HMS Macedonian, which is a 38-gun frigate early on in the war. As I said, it's one of the few victories for the U.S. during this war because they've lost so many sailors, they've lost so many vessels already before they jump into the war. But then they're just outmatched by the British Navy sort of throughout. He brings this ship with the United States, the USS United States, a 44-gun frigate, and the Hornet, an 18-gun sloop of war, to New London for repairs after he's captured it. but this happens in concert with a blockade of Long Island Sound and New York City, as well as Connecticut. As I mentioned, the U.S. Navy was largely outmatched by the British, aside from Decatur's victory. And so this blockade lasts the length of the war, 1813 to 1815. So while this blockade starts, Decatur is in New London here, having these ships begin to be repaired. But it also cuts off commerce, as I mentioned, for all of Connecticut and New York City too. And so one thing that I didn't mention was that the New England states traded more with Great Britain than some of the southern states did. And so they were already hurt by this War of 1812 as it broke out. This leads to the sheep craze and a lot of the wool industry sort of falling apart before it can be sort of rebuilt by people having their own livestock here in New England. But it creates a lot of hard times with commerce here in New England too. In Connecticut, some of Decatur's fleet is in New York City, so he has some repairs in New London, but he's also in New York City as well. He's determined to break this blockade and to re-enter the war. When he does this, he encounters Sir Thomas Hardy in Long Island Sound with his fleet that is leading the blockade. And then he flees to the safety of New London Harbor, where Forts Trumbull and Griswold are located at the mouth of the Thames River. There are some really interesting letters to read from Decatur as he writes to the governor of Connecticut about the dilapidated state of these forts and how disappointed he is in them. He spends a couple of days at both Trumbull and Griswold. I mean, they just aren't really being manned at that point. They haven't been rebuilt since the Revolutionary War. And so he spares some labor from his Marines and enlisted on the ships. But he's convinced, and he writes to the governor of Connecticut, he's convinced that they may withstand an assault by Hardy for a day or two, maybe 3 days. But he has 3 ships. The U.S. Navy is not the Navy that it is today or even 100 years ago. These 3 ships make up a considerable part of the might of the United States Navy, and he's unwilling to risk them by mooring them at the mouth of the Thames River where these forts are. And so he makes the decision to move farther upriver. He can't really flee. He can't leave Long Island Sound. And so he moves upriver along the Thames River because Hardy had moved his ships towards the mouth of the Thames River, starting this encroachment back and forth between him and Decatur. As I said, he retreats upriver until he sees this position that he scouts called Allyn Hill. Later, it's referred to his men in their journals as Dragon's Hill because he orders the cannons and the materials off of the ships that he moors just here in Clark's Cove. If you can see beneath what is now called Mount Decatur, this was then Allyn Hill, and constructs a fort at the top of it, bringing the guns and taking apart portions of the ships to create the fort. And so this is a small fortification that he builds atop the hill. And this map comes from an 1838 coastal survey map, so about 29 years later. But you can see that by now it's called Mount Decatur in recognition of Fort Decatur being there, as well as the diagram of the fort itself. If we zoom in, it appears to be a diamond or sconce shaped diagram that's been drawn there. And it looks to have 2 walls too, which will be important later. That's not something, we thought that was more stylistic the first time that we saw this map. Turns out they were accurately mapping the fort. Other locals indicate that in addition to creating this fort, he also installs an iron chain across the Thames River. to prevent the British fleet from attacking. So fans of Game of Thrones will remember this when the imp does this in one of the books. It's unclear if this really happened or not, but there is some anecdotal evidence that maybe it did. This is all taking place, as I mentioned, with really high tensions between the people who are living in New England, but also for the British fleet as well. New Londoners remember quite well 30 years prior when Benedict Arnold lands and burns at the Battle of Groton Heights, burns New London to the ground. And so they're quite worried that this is going to happen again. There's also the Yankee Torpedo Act in the United States, where money was offered to any citizen who could damage British ships. And so people are creating some makeshift submarine type vessels to try to do this. Here in Connecticut, the schooner, the Eagle, was transformed into a floating barge of 400 pounds of gunpowder and sulfur, which was allowed to be sort of captured by the British. And when the Americans tried to spring the trap, it happened earlier than they had anticipated. And while it did sink and kill the British that were on board the schooner, Hardy's ship, the Ramillies, escapes. But Hardy is infuriated by these tactics, and he requests a duel with Decatur several times to settle this, and whoever wins gets the ships. Decatur demurs at that challenge. But in any case, there's really high tensions on both sides of the fighting, such that Fort Decatur has been built. That's where Decatur's men have been for a couple of months at this point, but he's restless. He continues to try to slip the blockade. And so in October of 1813, as I mentioned, he hopes to slip through the blockade. He moors his ships at night off of New London Harbor. But as they're starting to leave, he sees what he believes to be blue signal lights. So you could use cobalt lenses with these lamps to signal to ships. Decatur views this as someone signaling to Hardy's fleet that they are about to flee. He's furious. Whether or not this actually happened, it's unclear. But in any case, he's very furious with the town of New London, who's also pretty furious with Decatur being there because they blame him for the reasons that the blockade exists. And there are loyalist sympathizers who are blamed in New London. But as I had mentioned before, this area of New England had borne a lot of the brunt of the trade embargoes in the previous decade or so. There's no engagements that happen at Fort Decatur. There's a raid by the British on American shipbuilding in Essex in 1814. By then, Decatur has gone overland to New York City to seek reassignment. And so he's back sort of in the fray on a different ship. He leaves a garrison of men and 2 ships at Fort Decatur, but the fort is only occupied for about 8 months or so before eventually Decatur takes ship in the East Indies to engage the British. The USS Hornet is eventually able to slip the blockade and join Decatur in the East Indies. But the war then ends with the Treaty of Ghent, and it's ratified by Congress in 1850. And so that's just a brief history of both Decatur, the man, as well as Fort Decatur and the events surrounding this fortification that is really only occupied for about 8 months or so at the most. As we look through Decatur, through the interceding 200 or so years, it's largely forgotten. Not completely. Here we see a boulder was erected by the Guardians of the Republic in 1898. So not 100 years later, but almost, remembering Fort Decatur. This is a 1934 aerial image where I've superimposed the fort itself onto it. This star here indicates this large iron ring that we actually found, Heritage found about a decade ago on a previous electrical transmission line survey. It could be something for mooring ships, but it could also be where a big chain was dragged across the river too. It's unclear. This is what the fort looked like in 2022. So there are trees that grow in it now. It's challenging to see a wide-scale view of it, especially when there was so much undergrowth on it. But I'll show you some other images as we move forward. And so as Kelly mentioned, we were approached by Gales Ferry Intermodal, not because they were required to do this phase 1 survey, but because they wanted to be proactive. They knew that they might eventually need to do this cultural resources. So even before they applied for their permitting, they wanted to have an understanding of what lay on this property, as well as a couple of other properties that was the entire project area. The project was for a number of different things, but part of it was to potentially create gravel from portions of the mountain itself. Obviously, that would be very detrimental to this site, and so they wanted to sort of know where the site was, how large was it, how much would need to be preserved, so on and so on. And so we began, as we often do in these phase 1 surveys, with the pedestrian survey, and we're quite shocked at not that it was dilapidated. Obviously, these types of forts are often dilapidated or buried or destroyed, but really how much was left too. And so we did not, at this point, do a full-scale clearing of the fort. That came later in the phase 2, and I'll describe that process. But we were able to sketch largely the fortification itself, this sconce fort here, with that GAR large boulder here, as well as the south bastion, and then stacked stones along the southern edges here. We did shovel testing, and as any good military archaeologist will know, that came to almost no avail. And then, of course, we did metal detection, where we found all of the relevant artifacts that we were interested in. And we did some preliminary ground penetrating radar too. So I'll talk about this phase 1 survey a little bit briefly and jump into the phase 2, where we really looked at the eligibility for it and did much wider scale testing too. This is just an overview of the main area in our phase 1 survey, where we were concentrated on the fort itself. And so there's a number of things here, but I'll draw your attention first to the black shovel test pits. Those indicate that we found nothing in them. All of them, there's only one that we actually found period artifacts. It's here, buried under the metal detection artifacts here. There were some pre-contact Native American artifacts that were found, unrelated to the fort, obviously, but very few artifacts recovered from the shovel test pitting. The circles are all from the metal detection, and so we have a lot of architectural remnants, as well as lead shot too, from the Marines who were stationed here. A lot of this dropped, some of it's impacted. We also have a couple of features we identified. So we identified a northern sentry, which is here, that had not been identified before, a large borrow pit here as well as the basic outline of the fort itself. And so I'll start with this northern sentry. This was not actually part of, because it's on a slope, not an area we were going to really focus on at first, but as one of our field directors was wandering through the woods, looking for a good place to use the facilities, he found this, and we then spent a lot of time surveying around these areas. The only STP that actually recovered period artifacts was from the center of it here. We not only found some interesting period artifacts, we also found daub that we believe this wall had been much larger. You can see in another view that a lot of the stacked stones have fallen over. And so we know they were there in the winter, and probably there was some makeshift daub to enclose this so that you could be warmer during the century. We found this eagle and shield motif KLN pipe, which is period, from the federal period. Here's an example of what it would have looked like if it had been new. There's a thick charcoal layer that was found in the shovel test pit too, likely indicative of a hearth just a makeshift one to keep warm while they were on sentry. And then I've got just a quick overview. You can see some of the stack stones that fall down below here with this 3D model. If it doesn't make you sick, sorry, as it's rotating there. The other artifacts that we recovered near the fort, as I mentioned, a lot of architectural remnants. Some of these, most of them machine cut. All of these actually are machine cut. We found a couple of hand wrought later. Again, what you would expect post 1790, early 1800, machine cut nails. A lot of them are bent, probably for corner fasteners. Brass buckles. A couple of pewter buttons were found. Remnants of fort construction, as well as military or domestic uniforms. You know, these are also commonplace artifacts that you might find other places too. It's hard to understate how this area of Allyn or Decatur Hill really doesn't have any other. I mean, there's a couple of stone walls from agricultural activities, but there's no. There is a 20th century cabin that was about half a mile from here, but not near to here. And so all of these artifacts that we recovered here, we believe to be pure. There were a couple of game traps and things like that that were more recent incursions into the site, but almost all of them were period. A lot of lead shot too, right? So some of it impacted, suggesting, again, we know there were no battles that were here, but suggesting that they were doing some maneuvering at the site. 60 and 30 diameter, so about 69 caliber, 39 caliber. Common with the buck and ball cartridge, which you can see here, where you have the larger 60 diameter shot and the smaller 30 shot to spread a classic American signature. Standard issue for smoothbore rifles that were used in the War of 1812. The preliminary GPR survey. I'm just going to go over two of the interesting transects here. So transect 7 moves from the northern part of the site to the southern bastion here. So this blue arrow goes this direction with my cursor as it does move across here. There's a trench that it goes up and over here, so you can see that in person. But then there's a lot of these fill soils as you move. You actually walk uphill while the rest of the hill slope falls down around you outside of it. So these fill soils, we believe, were added on to the fort to both level it out and create elevation here. And I'll get to that in a little bit when we look at the sight lines or the view shed analysis. But clear part of the construction. And as we think back to that large depression that was just to the west, that borrow pit, I mean, we're pretty confident that that's where that's coming from. This transect 6 moves from the east to the west here. And again, that goes from here left to right. And there are two trenches here and here that it cuts across. So again, you can see, well, if you are familiar with radargrams, you can see it. If you're not familiar, you'll have to take my word for it. That's what these indications are here and here are those ramparts that were created. And so this is just what I've already said. Clear evidence for the trench and rampart construction, as well as the filling here to the south too. Through the geophysics. So at this point, we'd only excavated 2 test pits within the fort, but we could tell a lot about the construction just from this preliminary ground penetrating radar. And so one thing that I didn't mention was that it was covered in all these brambles, which was a lot of fun to both excavate through, do the GPR through, and then eventually remove. But so after the phase 1B, I mean, we obviously knew that this was a site of extreme importance, one that was clearly eligible for listing in the National Register, which is the framework within which cultural resource management archaeologists such as myself work within. Is it significant? Is it worthy of preservation? Or is it significant for additional research? All of those were important here, but we did not know necessarily where the rest of Decatur's men were on this landscape. So were they restricted only to the fort? Was there a larger area within the parcel that we were working in where they had also been? Are there any other features? We found the northern sentry. We found the southern bastion. What else is there? And so we recommended that it needed to have additional analyses in what's called a phase 2 to assess it formally for the National Register, but also to determine the boundaries of the site itself. And so I'll talk a little bit about that now. The first thing that we did in the phase 2 was this really careful site clearing. This is a drone shot from Chase. He works for Gales Ferry Intermodal. Unlike me, his drone has bumpers on it, so it doesn't, when it hits a tree, it doesn't fall out of the sky. Mine is not that lucky. Whenever mine hits a tree, it falls out of the sky. So we didn't fly ours, we flew his instead. But this gives you a good sense looking to the west here at the South Bastion and then the eastern face of this fort. You can see the bedrock that underlies it, as well as some of that fill soil that I mentioned that was on top of it. That large monument with the GAR stamp on it is back here too. So we cleared it, and then we identified, these are after the fact, so we surveyed the entire hillside of sort of this whole area around here. But these are the 5 areas we identified as containing cultural material relevant to the occupation. And so before we move on to that, I just want to show a couple of viewshed analyses that we've done. This is from the South Bastion. So the South Bastion really affords you, if there were no trees, which there would not have been in 1812, because much of Connecticut was clear cut then. It was all pastured land. So the trees that you see today would not have been there. And the view is really striking. So in yellow here, this is where you can see from that South Bastion, it almost already gives you a 360-degree view, which is important. Decatur's not only worried about Hardy coming up here, he's worried about Decatur or Hardy coming here and then overland surprising them as well. So that's just the South Bastion. We have the North Sentry. So we're filling in some of the areas. I mean, it's very unlikely that they're going to come from the west across the river, but they might come up the slope here at night. And then we have this southern lookout area that I haven't talked about. It's one of the areas we identified, which really provides you a stunning view here to the south and to the west too. And so those 3 sort of viewpoints from the fort area, when you overlay all of them, the colors start to bleed a little bit. So when yellow overlaps with red, it becomes orange because you're seeing 2 areas that it's overlapping. Same thing with yellow and blue here, it becomes green. And then green here for a different shade of green for blue and red. But I think the point is well made that you can see 360 degrees from this fort. It is a really good location to build a fort, one that you will not be surprised. You might lose, you might be overmatched, but you're not going to be caught unaware so long as you have people at these 3 sentry locations. And so when we did this phase 2, we, as I mentioned, cleared a lot of the land. We did additional metal detection. You can see that this now shows the phase 1 and the phase 2. We have a lot more architectural artifacts that were recovered, again, more fasteners, lots and lots of dropped and impacted lead shot, some other domestic items too. Think of the types of things that you carry on your person. But mostly it's this sort of military or architectural hardware. And so I'm just going to show you, we found those at all 5 of the areas, no more though than here, the North Locust, what we call the fort. But instead of going through and boring everyone with these sort of GIS maps, instead I'll show you some nice pictures of some of the artifacts, although they are pretty corroded. So here we've got some animal tack on the left. I mentioned that Decatur drug all of that equipment, the cannons and the guns, up the mountain. There's a journal entry from a woman who lived nearby who said that 40 men tried to wrestle the gun up the hill and they didn't succeed. Sorry, not 40, 400 men, people from the village too. But once they got a team of oxen, they were able to do it. And so we believe we've got maybe some of this material from the draft horses, although of course it's an agricultural landscape too, so it might be an over imprint. A couple of possible tool fragments here. Unclear right now with their corroded. They're going through chemical conservation, but we've got some exciting other images that I'll show you in a minute. Lots of other items as well. A mouth harp here, a shoe buckle, a fob or penknife, the one that would hang from a chain, a heel plate, several buttons. One of them, a couple of them are period. All three of these we believe are period. The tomback. This one here was actually produced in Waterbury, Connecticut from the Aaron Rich Company, who we know fulfilled naval contracts during the War of 1812. And then this, so this shows this button before conservation. This is an image, an archival image of it. And this is once it's been slightly conserved. It's still going additional conservation. And then I've superimposed it over top of it. But it's a eagle with a fouled anchor, one that was worn by naval enlisted and officers during the War of 1812. So quite an exciting button for us to recover. Again, more musket balls. Some of them dropped, many of them dropped, but some impacted, again, suggesting maneuvers or firing that was happening. We wanted to dig deeper in these a little bit, though. And so we partnered with Quinnipiac University, as well as Scientific Imaging Services, to do both radiography, so x-rays of some of the corroded artifacts, as well as a technique called reflectance transformation imaging, or RTI, where I think we're all familiar with x-rays, but with RTI, the subject is stationary and you take several hundreds of images with controlled lighting to really create a surface model of the artifact. So I'm not going to go through all of these analyses, but here you can see on the left the corroded artifacts, and on the right what they look like after X-ray. Some notes from our lab manager, Susie Goders, are in here too. But in any case, a lot of really interesting artifacts, ones that we, again, associate with the period too. As a couple of them are a little bit too late, like this gimlet screw, but many other fasteners here, some other flat bottom screws that might have been from gun making, timekeeping, engineering type things that naval crews would have had. And then some of the animal tack as well. So both cast iron, horse and ox shoes, and some hooks as well. But really a fantastic way to get a sense for what we have before we do the conservation, to spend time on which artifacts we believe we will learn more once we conserve them. And so now I'm going to show you the RTI. So this is where I'm taking a video as the light is being controlled. So the light is moving back and forth over that KLN fragment, and it really helps pull out some of the details from within it. The next image is from a musket ball, one that appears that it might have been chewed. So it's got teeth marks on it. Of course, this is a big debate with archaeologists, whether it's people that not chewing, but are like sort of biting down on them while they're on sentry, or if it's pigs that come in later. Unclear to me whether it was a Marine or a pig who chewed on the lead, but in any case, there really are tooth marks on it. And then here, instead of, so before those were normal images, here this is what's called specular enhancement of that button. And so we'll control the light here, and you'll be able to see some of the details come out with it as I'm controlling the light as it moves back and forth in this specular enhanced version. Some of the stars are really popping over here that were harder to see at the beginning, or with the naked eye too. So some really interesting ways to garner more information about these artifacts prior to conservation. I'll quickly go through, I know we're sort of running out of time, some of the ground penetrating radar results. This is an image of all the transects that we collected. So quite a bit of work to collect ground penetrating radar when there are lots and lots of trees in your subject area, as you can see here. We did this all at 25 centimeter intervals. And so I'm going to go through, this is at 20 to 30 centimeters, so right beneath the plow zone, 50 to 60. And so what you're seeing here, the darker areas are what's weakly reflective, and the white areas are more positively reflective. So there's objects or rocks within these, potentially some of the trenches as well. Although here, because it's this sort of glacial landscape, and because there's all this fill that was put on top of the fort, there's not really a lot of great information we can glean from these amplitude maps. But when and this is the magnetometry work, so we did a magnetic survey as well. Largely what we found out was that the granitic rock is magnetic and sort of swamps our data. So the mag work wasn't super successful. But the GPR work was incredibly successful, just not really in the amplitude maps. In the profiles, we were able to identify clearly an interior structure within the fort, this secondary wall that cuts across the fort here, and then an exterior structure at the western edge of it, something that we refer to now as the western bastion of the fort. And so I'll show you these here. So this is this interior structure wall here. So there's this structure has a base here that was, we believe, used as a floor, this large rock that was just sort of there and flat, and then a wall to one edge of it. This is the exterior structure here, where it appears to have been chiseled into the rock, actually, the outline of the structure. This is the exterior trench. So we've already seen some of the trenches before. And then this is that interior wall with fill soils on top of it too. So quite complicated stratigraphy that they're creating as they're using this fort. We also painstakingly mapped by hand the entire fort itself. While we were doing this, after we had cleaned it, we noted that there wasn't, if you remember the first maps that I drew in the phase one, we just had sort of one wall around it. We noted after cleaning all the, let's call it 200 years of debris on top of it, that there's this secondary interior trench and an exterior trench here for two separate ramparts. We believe that there was probably a palisade here in between the two. And we have some evidence for that in this trench over here, as well as this one. We did not conclusively excavate around everywhere. We were trying to preserve as much of the site as possible. But we can also superimpose this with handheld photogrammetry and some drone work that we were able to use with Chase's work, where we've created a digital elevation model here of the fort itself, a orthomosaic of it as well. Here, again, kind of tough because of all the trees. But then we can take this digital elevation model, which is a good reconstruction of the fort itself, superimpose that on the hand-drawn map itself to get a really good view of the fort. And then I'll go through some of the excavations. That interior structure here, you can see the clear divide as you get into the structure here. This is that floor that we think they were using. And then the deeper humic feature soils here, as well as the natural subsoils out here. This is, again, that view with the radar. So we use the GPR to show us exactly where to dig this large excavation trench. That exterior structure, you can see where I mentioned where it had been chiseled here. There were stones that were somewhat stacked adjacent to this before we did the excavation. So we documented those in place as well. It's unclear if those were left over from this or they'd sort of been stacked at a later date. That interior wall, you can see, so this is an interesting trench because you see the natural soils here, but you see this fill, this is the A horizon that previously existed, and then fill soils on top of it here, and then a new A horizon that develops over the last 200 years or so, and then this wall cutting through here too, where these rocks were put in place. And here we can see that in the GPR again as well. Another large exterior trench. So this cuts through both the interior and the exterior trenches, which are here and here. Sorry, here and here. Mapped here again with the radar, deeper here and here. within the excavation as well. And these are all three-dimensional models that we created of the trenches as we excavate them, so we have those preserved forever, not just using the photographs. Finally, an individual three-dimensional model of that south bastion. Here again, a lot of it has fallen down. This is that area where that view shed is so striking that provides you almost that 360 degrees of the entire area. And so, we're running out of time. So I'll just conclude some of the information that we've learned. Decatur, as I mentioned, leaves in 1813, and he joins the East Indies theater for the remainder of the war. But here in Connecticut, we're left with this fort that he was able to construct in a short amount of time. It was incredibly defensible. It was never attacked. Not that Hardy, I think, knew of its location even, but one that would have provided good defense. It's this diamond-pointed sconce fort, which is sort of a Northern European style, not super common in the United States. There's this double-walled earthen embankment as well to provide, again, forcing the enemy to come quite up a lot in elevation to breach the fort. Prevailing views in all directions to prevent surprise by the attack by the British. It's the only sconce War of 1812 fort that I know of. I could be wrong, but it does provide quite a good position and ideal firing lines in all directions. It remains incredibly intact. There is, and so you can even see it here, there was one trench that someone in the last 40 or 50 years dug. It looks like an excavation trench to me, but I know of no other archaeologists in the region who excavated here. So it could be a looter's trench, or it could be some other archaeologist who worked on this fort, unbeknownst to us, they didn't publish it. I don't know. But aside from this one incursion into it, it appears to be completely intact. It's a single occupation fort, which is rare. Certainly that's rare for the War of 1812. These forts are almost always sandwiched between forts that are reused from the Revolutionary War, or they become reused later during the Civil War. And so it's quite rare to have only a War of 1812 fortification. And while there were low artifact counts, a couple hundred period artifacts, nobody lived here. This was only place where they were stationed. They were billeted in town in Gales Ferry. There's two main sentry areas that we located apart from the fort. These are areas where they were on lookout for the British, but there were also two other areas where there was maneuvers, training, and drilling that took place, as indicated by all the impacted lead and some dropped equipment as well. We know there were no direct engagements. As I mentioned, the fort is unique because of its isolation. If Fort Griswold and Fort Trumbull had not been in such disrepair, he would not have created this fort, right? But they were just so dilapidated that he couldn't risk these important pieces of the Navy. And so it really provides an ideal opportunity to study military life during a 7 to 8 month, engagement. One that I think there are other fortifications that are short-lived that provide those opportunities, but most of them, as I said, suffer from having a palimpsest of earlier or later occupations above or beneath them. And our geophysical methods were really critical to aiding in our archaeological understanding and locating features within the fort. So ordinarily, if we hadn't been able to use the ground penetrating radar, we would have had to dig many more than what we did in excavation units to locate those features, and we might not have located them. We were really able to pinpoint several interesting features to investigate in this phase 2 and preserve 98% of the fort, if not more than that. And so just to close, I think it's clear that this was a really good defensible position that Decatur created. It was determined through our work, and the SHPO concurred, that the site is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places under all 4 criteria. That's, again, unusual for archaeological sites. It's usual that they meet the criteria for D and maybe one of the other ones, but not A for the broad patterns of history because it's a War of 1812 fort, significant persons, Stephen Decatur, the architecture. It's, again, one of the only sconce forts from the War of 1812, if not the only one, as well as the immense research potential that I've described here. And as Kelly mentioned, this 3.44 acre parcel was conveyed recently to the Conservancy, and it will be protected in perpetuity. And so for those reasons, all of the interesting research that we were able to do, but also really the outcome, that's why it's such a great story of archaeology and developers too, and regulators working together to preserve this really important resource. And there's a lot of people to thank. They're not all mentioned here, of course, but of course the Conservancy for working with Gales Ferry Intermodal, as well as the SHPO, and Preservation CT, I should mention as well. Several people at Heritage listed here, as well as field technicians and field directors and metal detectorists. So that's it. That's my talk. Hopefully I didn't go too long. And I don't know how we want to do questions.
I have gathered a few questions for you, a couple of quick clarification questions, and then a few more. If you're ready. One question from Facebook. This may sound like an odd question, but were any oyster shells found within the structure?
No, we did not find. So we really. So one, we did not find a lot of the normal types of artifacts that you might expect to find on a domestic or even a military occupation, because we didn't do that sort of wide scale excavation. We did a lot of shovel test pits, but early on we realized that we would get more bang for our buck with the metal detection, which we recorded those artifacts with a high position GPS. But of course, oyster is not going to beep when you use a metal detector. We just found even in our large excavation units, no real faunal remains at all that we could associate. So no oysters.
Okay, great. One moment. Someone was asking, what is sconce fort? Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, so the word sconce just means diamond. So what the idea there is that it's you're giving yourself fewer lines of attack for the enemy to come up. So you've got wide angles with which to see where people are going to come from, as well as having good defensible positions. But the word sconce just simply means that diamond shape. And so if we go back, well, you can see it there, but here as well, if I draw my cursor, that's a sconce, right? I mean, it's not a perfect diamond, but there's a lot of landscape features that they were incorporating, like the ledge that underlies the site here too. So that's what I mean by sconce, is this shape.
Do we know the fort's complement, and like, are they militia? Were they militia? Someone said.
So there were Marines as well as enlisted. They're all sailors, but there are some Marines that he has. We don't know the entire complement, and that's largely because he garrisons men at both Fort Trumbull and Fort Griswold too. So he leaves some of his men from the 3 ships there. We do know that he was living in town so just down below at Gales Ferry, and he took on a number of recruits from the town as well. So cadets is what he called them. And so they were probably training up at the fort as well, but we don't have an exact count. And that's after spending quite a bit of time, Bill Keegan, hours upon hours at the National Archives, military archives, looking at the log books, looking at the diaries. There's not good evidence for the exact number of men.
Altonetti is asking, were you able to detect any shaft features within the fort using geophysics?
Shaft features?
Yes.
So we didn't detect any post holes, if that's what you mean. But or if by shaft you mean like a privy, I didn't see anything like that either. We were hopeful that we would find sort of trash pits, things like that. But I didn't talk a lot about it, but it's a really challenging environment to do archaeological geophysics because of the number of trees that are there, right? So you see the trees at the ground and the surface going up, but what they have beneath them is a dendritic pattern of roots that sort of cut everywhere. And then also the fill soils that they used to create the fort were not clean fill. They were taken from this glacial landscape. So there's lots of rocks in them too. And so it was an incredibly noisy environment to look at for geophysics. And that's why under ideal circumstances, the amplitude maps, you can see like rectangular features or circular structures, those types of things with Euro-American construction. Not so here. We were left looking at the profiles to sort of look at it more geologically, and then at the interruptions into those profiles to determine what types of features there were. And so I did not see any post molds or large shaft features at the fort. But we were lucky to find some of those structures that we were able to investigate with the larger excavation units.
Someone is asking, is there a projected size of the fort in square footage?
I'm sure there is. I have not done that. I now feel foolish for not doing that. It is a thing that I could do relatively easily, but I just never did. What a great idea. I will do that. And if there's a way for me to answer that later, I will.
Great.
I'm just making a note.
No problem. Someone asked if the pipe bowl fragment has an eagle on it.
It definitely does. Yeah. So it has an eagle with a shield, which is a federal period pipe that was common both by people in and around the shipping industry, naval, but also just the sort of early federal period, right, where there's a lot of motifs of the Republic that are quite common in the United States. So it's not, we didn't use the bore stem of the pipe to date it to the period. We used the motif, and it's one that is common from this time period.
Okay, I have a two-parter question if you have a few more minutes.
Sure.
For the pre-contact positive STPs, did you all find mostly debitage and flakes, or were there any points? And did you collect those artifacts for lab study? I know that the survey. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No, go ahead. What's the last part?
Well, it just says, I know that the survey had a direction for finding and studying the artifacts associated with the fort, but just curious about how you handled the pre-contact artifacts. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So we definitely explored them. So it wasn't A phase one survey is not necessarily geared towards only one type of site. It's to determine what types of archaeological sites are present, as is a phase two. And so we found limited pre-contact archaeological deposits across the landscape, but we did find them. Some of it was, we had a couple of pieces of debitage. We actually found what's called a parallel stemmed projectile point made out of quartzite. It's a really interesting and fantastic example of this poorly known type. It's from the early Archaic period, the transition between the late Paleo-Indian and the early Archaic period. It's been invasively thinned at the base, and it actually has tip damage where it was impacted. We spent a lot of time excavating around that, and all we found was the projectile point. And so it's just a one-off that was lost. I mean, we did not find any other archaeological evidence near that. So probably something lost while hunting, or just sort of discarded after it entered the end of its use life. But it is important. We also found a copper projectile point, triangular type, one that is common in the central, sorry, not in the central, in the western portion of Connecticut, but one that is generally from about 150 years earlier. And so these are 17th century projectile points that were used by indigenous Americans, indigenous Native Americans, when they're taking copper kettles and cutting them and using them as projectile technology. Again, we spent a lot of time next to that artifact looking for additional 17th century finds, and we found nothing. So we did spend a lot of time looking for indigenous archaeology. We just only had these isolated finds for the most part.
Great. Combining a couple questions into one. Were there cannons on the fort, and does the palisade appear to surround the entire fort?
There definitely were guns at the top of the hill. I don't know if they were ever at the fort. I know from logbooks that Decatur paid to have carts for the guns created. And so I know that there were cannons on top of the hill. I think that they were most likely at that southern lookout area where we found the eagle and fouled anchor button that had the largest view. But we found no artillery. We found no other evidence of cannons except for we know from the eyewitness accounts that the men struggled with bringing the guns up to the top of the hill. I just don't know where he placed them. They could have been at all of the sentry locations, but I think that if what you wanted was a view of where the ships would be coming from, you would have used that southern lookout area. And so that's using like what archaeologists refer to as a COCOA analysis, key military terrain analyses, using that type of analysis to determine where they would have placed them. But that's just a supposition.
Someone's asking what kind of ground penetrating radar was used. Was it a CART?
Yeah, so we used a ground coupled unit. So here we used a 350 megahertz geophysical survey systems antenna. It's called a hyperstacking antenna, where it weeds out some of the noise, but it was used with a 3-wheel cart because it allows the unit to come up and down off of the ground better. It looks sort of like a baby stroller. For a lot of reasons, I don't use a drone to conduct GPR survey because you get a lot of airwaves and a lot of other interference, but also for the same reasons that I mentioned that I didn't fly my drone here. Imagine putting a $20,000 piece of equipment onto a $10,000 drone and it hitting a tree. It's just not something that I'm interested in doing. Also, the data would not be very good. But it was a ground coupled unit, a mid-range antenna, one that is common that archaeologists use.
Thank you. We have most of the questions, but we need to move along because it's 10 minutes after 6 already. But just a couple of quick comments. Rebecca Crisp wanted to say, just wanted to thank you for your excellent work and presentation. The War of 1812 is important in the history of our country. And Bill Ross wanted to share a very nice presentation. You made clear how important the site was. Thank you.
Okay.
And I wanted to ask Kelly or you if you wanted to talk for a minute or two about the future of the site, and then we can wrap up our discussion.
Yeah, I'll hop in. I saw some of those questions coming in from folks about accessibility to the site. And so we're still in the midst of the transfer of the initial parcel. And so we actually aren't the owners quite yet of that. And it's not an easy site to get to. You probably saw from some of the terrain photos that Dave shared. We're up on a hill. The access is very difficult. And like many of the Conservancy's preserves, it won't be open like a public park. So you won't be able to just roll up and walk up there. And that's primarily to protect the site, but also to protect people who would be visiting for liability purposes. And again, it's not like it's right on the road. It's not easy to get to, but keeping in mind, the Conservancy acquires these properties so they can be used for research and educational purposes. And so our hope would be to be able to have it open to the public, maybe on a limited basis or occasionally for guided tours. Again, it wouldn't be you could just go up anytime. So it's something that we would be exploring. And additionally, we will have support from the property owner as part of the transfer, ideally to develop public outreach materials for the property so we can make sure people know about this really important place, even if they're not able to get out to it in person. So, and this goes for all our preserves. If you ever have questions about them or are interested in learning more, you can always reach out to the Archaeological Conservancy regional directors. I'm here in the East, but we're easy to find information online to find out more about our properties.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you, Dr. Leslie, for your time this evening and sharing with us. We really, really appreciate it.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and thanks to all of you out there that attended. And hopefully you can check out the rest of our 2026 virtual lecture series. We'll have our next one on March 19th. Check us out on our website. Thank you so much. Have a good
Great.
night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dave. Take care.
Bye.